Hello, good evening, and welcome to the second edition of our Adult Education Summer Series. I am very excited to welcome my dear friend and colleague, Meagan Rosales. And before she gets started, I'm going to let everybody get into the Zoom. You know what I'm saying? We've got to make sure that everybody gets signed in and signed on, and we'll get started in about 2 minutes. While that's going on, take a minute, make sure that your screen is adjusted the way that you want it and that you can see Meagan. She is going to be sharing her presentation. And like always, we're going to leave some time at the end for questions. So a great way to do that is to put your questions into the Q&A below at the bottom bar of your screen. If you like a question that somebody else has asked, you can vote for it or upvote it, and then that question will go to the top. And we will try to get to everyone's questions this evening. And I know that Meagan has prepared an amazing talk. So that said, I'm going to let you take it away. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Meagan Rosales, and I am one of the Parish School's reading specialists. I've worked with our students with language and learning disorders or differences over the past 13 years at the Parish School. And I'm so passionate about helping these students learn how to read. So I'm about to jump into my presentation. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Of course, this always takes a quick minute. Whoops. And we will make sure we start at the beginning. All right. So my presentation today is about the 5 pillars of reading instruction. And as a reading specialist and as a parent as well, I think it's so important for us to really go back to the basics of what reading is about. And so let me go ahead and put on presenter view and we'll get started. So let's jump into this. So just to get started, I just wanted to do a little focus on why is reading so important. And if we think about reading and literacy, reading is the single most important skill that is applied to be able to learn in all academic content areas. So the skill is not solely used for reading group times or language arts, but it does encompass encompasses the sciences, math, and social studies, etc. So during your children's educational career, they will need this skill. And when we think about how children are taught to read, they are specifically learning how to read or break the code from kindergarten to 2nd grade. Then they are expected to start using reading to learn by the end of 3rd grade, meaning that they are able to read accurately, fluently, and with comprehension. So when we think about reading outside of the academic bubble of school, we also think about literacy and how reading is only a part of literacy as well. So our ultimate goal is to help our students gain these skills. Because literacy is not only defined as the ability to read and write, but also is the lifelong intellectual process of gaining meaning from text. So, and literacy is also the ability or competency to read, write, speak, and listen in a way that lets us communicate and make sense of the world. So we want our children to become the successful communicators that they can be, as well as readers. So, to jump off of that, we will dive into the 5 pillars of reading instruction, also known as the Big 5. And I have a picture here at the bottom. This picture is my son, Warren. And I threw a couple of pictures in of my kids because really and truly, I love the fact that when we think about reading and literacy, we think about the function of reading in their lives as well. And here he is reading a map. So I'm going to keep on going. So the big five, or the 5 pillars of reading instruction, if you can see on this graphic, they are phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, also known as the 5 pillars of reading instruction. And these came about due to Congress asking the director of the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, in consultation with the Secretary of Education, to establish and charge a panel to assess the status of research-based knowledge, including the effectiveness of various approaches to teach children to read. And from this assessment and research, they pinpointed these 5 components to focus on for effective reading instruction. So as a parent, thinking about these 5 things, and I'll dive into it more, it's important to think about when your child goes into school, to think about, or to even question when you go into their school, what specific reading programs are they using? Are these 5 components embedded within that instruction as well? So it's important to see if those components are present, how they are integrated, and how they are taught within that program as well. So I'm going to keep on going. And our first pillar that we're going to touch on is phonemic awareness. So Amy and I were talking just a moment ago, and we talked about it's so great to have just an overview of what reading is. And when we send our children to school, we think, oh, well, jumping into kindergarten, we're going to learn about phonics. But reading starts before phonics comes along, and it starts with our language and how we use language. So I'm going to go ahead and continue going. So our first pillar is phonemic awareness. And phonemic awareness is defined as the oral manipulation of sounds, syllables, rhymes, words, and sentences. And it is also one of the best predictors of reading success. So to talk a little bit about phonemic awareness provides children with the essential foundational knowledge of the alphabetic system, which are sounds. Phonemes are the smallest units of spoken language. So when we think about phonemes, we're thinking about those letter sounds, b, a, k, those simple sounds that we just learned from the beginning. Instruction in phonemic awareness involves teaching children to focus on or hear and manipulate those sounds or phonemes, and to understand that spoken words are made up of the sequences of speech sounds. So findings from the National Reading Panel also showed that teaching children to manipulate phonemes in words was highly effective and significantly improved students' own understanding of phonemic awareness skills, along with reading. And phonemic awareness can also help in spelling development as well. In this talk today, I'm not going to dive too much into writing because this is more of a focus on reading, but these skills do intertwine and integrate with each other. Phonemic awareness is also a necessary instructional component within a complete and integrated reading program. Those skills should be taught explicitly, systematically, and we're making sure that we teach these phonemic awareness skills about 1 concept to 2 concepts at a time, and most of the time in small groupings. So whenever you walk into a classroom, sometimes younger classrooms, pre-K, or in the primary levels, kinder, first grade, you might see kids working in small groups, working on things like rhyming, blending sounds orally, thinking about how to segment sounds, so breaking sounds apart from words, or even identifying those initial sounds at the beginning of a word and the final sounds at the end of the word. And that is specific to sounds, not looking at letters yet. Phonemic awareness, like I said, is one of the best predictors of a student's ability to read fluently. This ability to hear speech sounds clearly and to differentiate them is what allows us to acquire language easily. And this knowledge of language is key to our understanding of what we read. So when we think about some of the students that we serve at Parish, we do come across kids that have difficulty with processing specific sounds or articulating sounds. And that's why we have wonderful speech pathologists that we work with daily. But if you are not at the Parish School, that's okay too, because those are specific things that you can work on at home, or work on with a speech therapist that your child might be working with. And so when we think about different activities, what can we do as parents at home? Because I get this question a lot in all of these areas. And so I added this little tidbit to each of the pillar that I'm presenting today. So what can we do as parents? We can play word games with our children. Can we create rhymes in the car going to school? Hey, I see a lamp. Give me another word that rhymes with lamp. Camp. So, or we're going up a ramp if we're driving. There are different ways that we can play with those sounds. Can we identify sounds as we're talking in the car? These are all oral or auditory games that we're playing together. Identifying sounds at the beginning of the words, like I said, the middle words. Can we even identify a vowel sound? That's a little bit harder when we talk about phonemic awareness skills, is identifying a vowel sound. So, but also blending sounds. Can you tell me a word can you tell me the word if I say jump? Can they start practicing blending those sounds and tell you the word jump? Those are all great games to play on a car ride or just at home. You could do it environmentally so they can match what they are saying to something specific and concrete around them. Like if you're at the pool, you could say, I see the water. Put it together, that's water. So different things that you could do. It's also great to read nursery rhymes and poems to your children. Find words that rhyme. Also counting out the sounds in a word, which would help with segmenting. If I say the word bump, how many sounds do you hear in that word? The parts in a syllable. If I go back to water, how many parts are in water? How many times do you open and close your mouth? Water. So that's 2. Or the number of words in a sentence. I went to the pool. How many words are in that sentence? I went to the pool. These are all great, simple activities that are going to lend itself to reading and to other literacy skills such as writing later on. All right, I'm going to keep on going. So that's what I have for phonemic awareness. The second pillar that I have is phonics. Phonics is the sound symbol relationship of letters and the combination of a particular set of sounds or a particular sound. So with phonics instructions, we help beginning readers understand how letters are linked to sounds or phonemes. So we're starting to move away from phonemic awareness and apply what we know from phonemic awareness to pairing it with the specific symbol. So phonics can be taught systematically, which is what mostly all schools do, is that they have a systematic approach to teaching phonics, or incidentally, which means you can do it in your environment as well. And it helps to introduce that alphabetic principle, like I just said, that written letters or symbols represent sounds of spoken language. It's important for children to build that automatic response when learning phonics, which is also called automaticity when we talk about it in our educational world. But we love building automaticity to recall those sounds whenever you see the symbol, because that's going to lend itself to children being able to smoothly blend sounds to read words accurately. And so our focus with phonics is to focus on recalling those letter to sound symbols and then being able to start blending those sounds together. And then phonics is also wonderful because it can be used to help segment and break apart sounds to then within a word to then write or spell accurately. So that is another way that it lends itself to literacy. Phonics, when thinking about phonics and how to best help your child with phonics, what can you do at home? Number one is always team up with your teacher. Always team up with your teacher. If they're working on a specific sound of the week, letter of the week, specific sounds in class, they'll be able to help. Open up a dialogue with you about what specific words you could focus on, or what sounds are you focusing on in what place of a word. Is that sound happening at the beginning of the word, at the end of the word, or is there even a certain rule to that sound? We could not encourage you enough to listen to your child read daily. Encourage them to use a strategy to decode. So when you're listening to your child read and you're observing their reading skills, it's so important that you're noticing, are they tracking one-to-one correspondence? Are they looking at each word? When they come to an unknown word, do they stop? And do they use a strategy to look at the word and start decoding each sound in that word? Or are they going to guess and they're going to look at that picture and try to make a smart guess about what that word is? We want to get back to, let's look at this word. Let's start at, whether we're starting at a vowel and decoding or we're starting at the beginning of the word and decoding to figure out if that word is going to match that picture. While you're driving around, another great idea is look at environmental print. With younger children, it's great to go drive around and, my son's name is Warren. His favorite letter is W. Well, we see that in front of Walmart and he can place that sound. He can see that letter and we can practice sounding out that first sound in the word Walmart. Or we could look at different other types of environmental print. Kids love stop signs. We love traffic signs. We love road signs. Best ways to look at a word, find a letter, tell me the sound of that letter. You can always make flashcards at home with specific sounds or spelling patterns and have kids repeat those to you if they've learned them. And you could go on letters. There are companies that make letter sound puzzles as well, or even go on a letter hunt. Those are pretty fun to do with your kids. Go walk around the neighborhood, see if you can find a letter within your environment, whether it's on a sign, whether it's out in nature, how different maybe parts of nature, like if you see two sticks on the ground, creating a V, what's that letter? What sound does it make? So you could just go on a letter hunt. And then moving on from phonics, phonics is pretty wonderful just because, we're starting to grow from phonemic awareness. We've got some skills in place. We're starting to put symbols to letter sounds. And as children start to progress in learning phonics, we start to build fluency. So I'm going to move on to fluency. Here it is. And when we think about fluency, we think about the ability to read with speed, accuracy, proper phrasing, and expression, which is a lot. Fluent readers are able to do this. So they're able to read pretty quickly or at a speed that is comfortable for them. Accurately, meaning that they are using those phonics rules, or they're using decoding strategies to decode a word accurately or precisely with proper phrasing. Are they reading in 3 to 4 word phrases, or are they going word for word? Or are they, if they're still beginning, they may be going sound to sound in a word. And then with correct expression, are they understanding those parts of the punctuation that is within a sentence? So we think about that. We think about the prosody, the sound and intonation at which they're reading as well. And then when we think about fluency, we also know that reading practice is recognized as an important contributor to fluency. So fluency is going to come along. It's gradual. So when we see those beginning readers, reading can be very laborious. It can take a lot of time for them. It's very slow. But as they continue to practice and practice and practice, then we're going to get a little bit quicker, and we're going to become more accurate in being able to decode. So it does take a lot of practice. Our students that have difficulty with this, it's going to take a lot more time and a lot more explicit instruction, and that's okay. It's okay. It's just going to take them a little bit longer sometimes. And then, you know, and then you have specific people that you're working with to help them as well. And then when we think about fluency, what can we do at home? Okay. Well, one of the best ways to practice fluency at home is guided oral reading. When you step into the classroom and you see small reading group times like Daily 5, there will be a time when your students are with a teacher for about 30 minutes in a small group, and they're working specifically on these things, where they may all have the same text and they're reading it together. Sometimes they're listening to the teacher read it first and then going back and rereading it. So when you're at home, though, go ahead and read the text to your child first. That is okay. Not unless your child wants to read it to you, and that's okay too. You know, read the text to your child first, or the book. Have your child reread it silently, so to themselves, see if they can do it by themselves. And then have your child read the story aloud with you.
Meagan, would it be okay if I jumped in? I just got a question here with regards to fluency and the guided oral reading at home. What would you say about if a parent had a child that really doesn't like to sit for very long when they're reading or when being read to? And I know that you talked a lot about, you know, that this develops gradually over time in the practice, but if that, you know, that ability to sit, whether they're the one reading or being read to, can you speak to that a little bit?
So if I'm understanding correctly, if this child has difficulty sitting, I mean, that's okay too. I mean, are they able to walk around and read? We do have kids that do that as well.
Okay.
Or if it's too hard to read, or they just don't have the attention span, sometimes it's key to lower that rope a little bit for them, see how much they can read, and then we can bring that rope up and see if they could read a little bit longer the next time. And sometimes it comes to a point of, do they have the stamina to read for a good amount of time?
Okay, wow. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
No problem. I'm glad that you brought that up too, because I haven't even thought about talking about stamina on here, but with fluency, and with younger children, it does take a lot of time to build stamina to read as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And folks, if you've got questions, you can go ahead and start putting them into the chat. These are ones that came through via email, so I'm so happy to take those there as well. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you guys for asking. So whenever your child is doing the guided oral reading at school too, it is systematic, and the teachers are giving explicit guidance and feedback back to the children. While you're reading with your child at home too, and they're reading to you and they come up across a word that may be difficult, continue to encourage them to do things like sound out the word, things like that. If they're having difficulty, you don't necessarily have to push them too hard at home, because you also don't want to discourage them. Sometimes if they're getting too frustrated, or if they're sitting for too long and the expectation is to read through the whole book, we may get to a point that they're not really going to enjoy what they're doing. And motivation is also key to being able to read and pick up these skills as well. So on top of this, with fluency, it can have a significant and positive impact on word recognition and comprehension as well. And then one other thing from the National Reading Panel's findings was that, the guided repeated oral reading, so you could read it, and this guided oral reading at home is key in being able to build fluency, but also have your child read it multiple times over a span of time. So when you have your children coming back up to you to read the same book for bedtime for the 5th time, 6th time, it's okay. It's all right. And this time around, you can have them pick out certain words that they're learning. Or if they can read it from memory that time, let's do it. And then let's build upon it with comprehension.
You spoke about motivation, and a question just came in about that.
Mm-hmm.
How does a parent know what level book to be buying, or, what their child should be reading, because I do hear what you're saying. If a child is really excited about the content, they're probably going to be more inclined to read.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But depending on their level of reading, that can be different as well. So when it comes to specific level books, whenever you're at your school, most schools do a reading assessment where they will figure out, or they will kind of give this assessment to see what level, which is also based on their grade level of reading.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be based off of their accuracy and fluency, as well as their comprehension. Because we do have lots of students that can read fluently and have difficulty with comprehension. And vice versa, where students have difficulty with the fluency piece in decoding, but when giving the accommodation to read aloud or to listen to it, can understand it pretty well.
Okay.
So, and with those leveled readers, it's trying to find a good benchmark of where around this child can perform, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that answered your question. So teaming with your teacher again would be great during the school year, because those will give you specific levels. If a child shows a particular interest in a book too that's appropriate for them, why not dive into it?
Yeah.
And if they need help reading it, or if they just want to listen to you the first time, that's okay too. Because not only are you modeling to them what a specific reading behavior or skill is, but they're also enjoying the story with you. And part of reading is that connected piece.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. I'm trying to think about where I'm jumping back into this. So thinking about fluency, it's the ability to read a text accurately and quickly. When fluent readers read silently also, they might recognize words with automaticity. So that word automaticity is coming back. So we're moving from the automaticity of understanding that letter sound correspondence, letter sound symbol correspondence, to word recognition. And that is key to building fluency as well. basically those group of words quickly to help, students group words quickly to help them gain meaning from what is read when this happens, and they read aloud effortlessly and sometimes with expression, and with expression has to be taught as well. Fluency is important because it provides a bridge between word recognition and comprehension. And because fluent readers do not have to concentrate on decoding the words, they can focus their attention on what the text means. This is our goal with fluency. All right. Let's see, we just talked about that fluency develops gradually over time. And fluency is not a stage of development at which readers can read all words quickly and easily. Like we said, it is gradual, it's a development. Fluency changes depending on what readers are reading, their familiarity with words, and the amount of practice with reading their text. All right, I got my notes in front of me. And then we talked about the highlights from evidence-based research on fluency instruction, and that's that repeated and monitored oral reading. And then moving on from there, so moving on from fluency, we're being able to read with automaticity. We move on to the comprehensive pieces of reading, which include vocabulary, and then we'll talk about comprehension. So vocabulary is wonderful because it is so language rich and so language based. And vocabulary is that ability to understand the words that have been decoded, but also those words that we have orally heard, auditorily heard, orally given. And basically, we know that if a reader can decode an unknown word, or a reader can decode an unknown word, if the unknown word is within the reader's vocabulary, the reader will understand it. So let me rephrase it one more time. So when the reader comes across an unknown word to decode, if that word is within the reader's vocabulary, that reader will understand it. But however, if it's not within the reader's vocabulary, then the reader must determine the meaning by other means. So then we're thinking about, oh no, do they know how to use context clues to figure out this unknown word? Are they going to have to make other connections that might not connect all the way with that meaning of the word? So it's so important that we help build our own children and our own students' vocabulary daily, because the larger the vocabulary that the students are able to understand, the easier it is to make sense of the text. So we know that vocabulary can be learned incidentally in the context of a storybook reading. So if children are more inquisitive, they may ask a question about what's happening in the story that can be tied back to specific vocabulary. They can also, and so when you think about that, you're thinking of a very rich context storybook reading. And we think about that with younger students with picture books as well, or in listening to others, directly or indirectly. Another way that we can enhance vocabulary is learning words before reading and having a discussion about those words that your child is going to come across. So it's very important to pre-read the books that your children are reading if you want to have more buy-in and discussion about that vocabulary, have a deeper understanding about what they are reading. Another piece of vocabulary is trying to make connections and build background knowledge or an understanding of what those words might mean, and then apply it to the text, just like we just talked about. We also know that repeated exposure to a word will help enhance vocabulary development, and substituting easy words for more difficult words is very helpful too. So that is a way to scaffold vocabulary for children to better understand what a word means. So for an example, last week in our camp class, we read a sentence that had a word had the meaning of the word mad or furious. And we went through and we came across the word cross. And then we went around the room and we talked about what are other words for the meaning cross. Students came up with mad, angry, frustrated, disappointed. One even said furious. And in that manner, we have just learned 5 other synonyms to talk about the word cross. And I think that is huge. You are expanding that, and that exposure is key as well. A strong vocabulary also helps children think more deeply, express themselves, learn quickly, and read at or above grade level when they can piece that comprehension together as well. So when we talk about vocabulary as well, the more you talk with your kids at home, have conversations with your children. Sometimes it's great to put down the devices and have a conversation. Sometimes it's great to include the devices and have conversations with your children. It's so important because there's a direct link that the quantity of your conversations is just as important as the quality of your conversations that you're having with your children when it comes to vocabulary. You can always narrate what you're doing around your house. That's great for building language with younger students. Talk to yourself, think aloud, wonder aloud. That might seem kind of crazy at times, but then you're also modeling problem-solving skills to your children. And you're giving them this script of how to problem solve, but you're also giving them more language. And that's key to building vocabulary. Sing songs. We sing all the time. Younger classrooms, you hear music embedded in their lessons all the time. Listen to podcasts or audiobooks with your kids. Have a discussion about that. Use new words in more familiar contexts. And then always practice phonemic awareness with it. Because on top of that vocabulary, that phonemic awareness is going to help with decoding and writing later on. All right, I'm going to keep going. Oops. All right, and comprehension. Comprehension is the last of my pillars that I'm going to talk about today. And comprehension is basically the essence of reading. It's the ability to understand the story or text read. And it's essential not only to academic learning in all subject areas, but also to lifelong learning. There's a bigger piece to comprehension than what we read in a book. And comprehension is such a complex cognitive process, and it's best understood with the role of vocabulary instruction as well. So we want to make sure that that vocabulary instruction is also embedded with comprehension. Comprehension is an active process that requires an intentional and thoughtful interaction between the reader and the text as well. And comprehension is enhanced when readers actively relate the ideas represented in print to their own knowledge and experiences and construct that mental picture in their memory. That's a lot. Comprehension is a pretty heavy skill to have, and it takes a lot to work on as well. So with comprehension, thinking about comprehension skills can improve by teaching students to use specific cognitive strategies. And when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about, let's bring up background knowledge before we read a text so we can start making connections to that text with our prior knowledge, what we already know. We work on inferencing with comprehension, which is understanding what is written, but also understanding what is unwritten in the text as well. Monitoring, reading, and clarifying. Questioning by learning dialogues within the text with the author. Learning how to have a dialogue with peers and teachers to generate questions. Searching and selecting information to answer those questions. Summarizing and visualizing or organizing to construct that mental image, or using a graphic organizer for extracting and constructing meaning from the text. So that was a lot of information. So those are just specific cognitive strategies that we use for comprehending a text. On here, I did put, how can we practice this at home? And we do talk about questioning, having a discussion, which, you know, the more book club type things that we do with our children within reading, having an open discussion as opposed to quizzing them about a story will help in, will also help bring out more language as opposed to having them or asking our children yes, no questions about the text. So mainly having a discussion about what is happening is key. So when we think about our younger students, they may be able to read the print, but sometimes you get more details from the pictures. And we think about that with those picture books when kids are younger. And then you can talk about how the characters are feeling. What is the intent of the character? How do you know? Can we guess what is going to happen next? There's a lot of things that can go into it. And the more you can discuss this with your younger kids, the better that you're going to have them understand what's happening. And then even thinking about thoughts and feelings of those characters as well. There's a big social piece to comprehending text. Kids with perspective taking skills have a little bit more difficulty with this sometimes. And even with older students, when we start talking about what is the point of view of this text? Who is explaining what's going on? Is it the narrator? Is it being read in first person, second person, third person? Is it what is happening with the character? Can you put yourself in the place of a character and tell us what's going to happen? What's his intent? What is he feeling? But also taking yourself out of that as an older student and thinking about the author's purpose of writing a book. What is the intent of the author? That's a big comprehensive piece as well. What is the intent of the author? What's the author's purpose? What's the author's craft? Why are they writing in a specific literary genre? That is really key for a lot of students to understand, because when we think about the genre of a book, they may be wanting to give factual information as opposed to a narrative. It's a little bit different.
So with that last piece that you were going into, now we've moved from an EC student, really you're looking at the trajectory of where is literacy going, right? And,
Absolutely.
and all of those super underlying social competencies that are necessary to make those smart guesses and basically overall understanding. Is that
absolutely
right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And one strategy that we talk about with our kind of lower elementary, upper elementary students is to keep a journal of what they are reading. Can they draw pictures? Can they make that mental representation of what's going on in print, you know, to their brain? Can they create this storyline in their brain of what is happening? Because that will give us the biggest predictor too of how well they're comprehending the text or what specific things they're summarizing. Okay, and that brings me to the end of and of my presentation. So I'm going to stop share.
Meagan, thank you so much. I'm remiss. I want to talk to you guys a little bit about Meagan Rosales. She is a reading specialist here at the here we are virtually on our campus of the Parish School. And I think something that is so compelling about her is that over the past 13 years, she has dedicated her work to being on our Parish School campus. And that has been, in her words, in a variety of roles. She spent 2 years as a paraprofessional. She spent 2 years as a student teacher. She taught summer camp every single one of those years. And then she moved on to being a lead teacher. And now she's a reading specialist. So it's really, really incredible to see all the ways that she has dedicated her work experience to our community. And something very endearing that she said to me just before we came on was that she's done a lot of growing up at the Parish School. And I think that that is amazing. Meagan is certified at the state level in terms of being a reading specialist, and her master's is as well as a reading specialist. So very, very wonderful. What we're going to do next is go through the questions. I've got some in the Q&A and some in the chat. So I'm going to surf between the two.
All right.
And so here we go, Meagan. Is it okay for my child to read from memory? I feel like when he reads the same book over and over, he really just has it memorized and he's not really reading it.
So that's a great question, because I feel like my 4-year-old loves doing this as well. But that's when you notice, you've got to be a little bit more diagnostic about how you're approaching that reading piece. So if they're memorizing it, great. Well, let's start diving into if that your child is specifically working on identifying specific words, branch off of that. You might have to get a little creative with it. You can focus on specific words, identifying what words are in, like if you have a simple sentence, the cat was on the fence, the cat was in the pool. That's just as a quick example. See if they can find a specific word. Then you can work on, hey, what's the beginning sound of the word? What's the ending sound of the word? Hey, let's write another page to the story. With predictive or repetitive text, it's great because the script is already there. What would they like to add to it? How can you add more to this conversation or more to this book? So that's one example if you're with a younger student. So, playing back on more phonemic awareness skills or phonics. You could also dive more into comprehension. You could dive into, I'm trying to think. So if they know the story really well and they've memorized it, I'm thinking that specifically with decoding, is that correct? So if that's the case, I would dive into more of those skills and then just add to it. And they may feel comfort with that story as well.
And I think also too, if I can just add from a social learning perspective, if you have a child that has memorized the story and if you've got one of those stories where there are huge expressions on the characters' faces, you might get into questions like, what do you think he's thinking?
Mm-hmm.
Or, oh, you just read that he's mad. I wonder why he's mad. So being able to talk about the thoughts and the feelings of the characters and making smart guesses about those things.
Absolutely, Amy. I absolutely agree with that.
Let's see. Here is a question, and some of these are very specific, so you may or may not, some of these might be more appropriate. We can answer via email and whatnot. Is there a specific reading program that works best for a child with a low IQ? We have gotten our daughter to the point where she can read isolated words, but she struggles to get meaning from sentences. So for example, she can pick out each word in the sentence, go get your shoes, might not understand that she should go get her shoes.
Absolutely. And okay, so I think that's a really great example, and a really great question, because when we think about our children with like learning differences, there are a variety of programs that students can learn to read from. But with that piece, sometimes even with a systematic and explicit approach to reading, when it gets to the part of comprehending, just like what was stated, if she reads go get her shoes, but is not understanding that's the same as go get your shoes, like actually physically doing it, then it's going to take a lot of practice of let's read it, now let's go practice it, I think, to make it more functional, if that makes sense. You're muted.
I muted myself. That makes a lot of sense. And that's actually, that's a great bridge and a great language activity.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes when kids are reading, because that comprehension piece, it can be very difficult for a lot of our kids with learning differences. Sometimes breaking it down, making it as functional, making it as concrete as possible for them is key for them to understand or to make that connection to print.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here is another one. It says, I have a 5-year-old and I'm kind of horrified that so much hardcore academics will be pushed in kindergarten. She doesn't respond well to demands, but learns well when things are relaxed and fun. I'm concerned that traditional public education will traumatize her. What is your school's philosophy of approaching literacy with flexibility for children with children's different developmental needs? That is a wonderful question.
That is a great question. I've got lots of answers for that question, actually, because while I was at the Parish School, I'm still at the Parish School. While I was a primary teacher, I was a primary teacher for almost a decade. We like to approach our lessons in a very multisensory way. We want children to be able to learn academics, not only reading, but math, sciences, everything, in a way that is tactile, that is visual, that is going to lend itself to a more creative and more, I guess, more bolstered experience to understanding a specific content, a specific concept or skill. And when at the Parish School, there are a few different approaches to reading that we use, decoding and comprehension. And in the lower levels, we may use the DuBard Association method from the University of Mississippi, and that's a specific reading program that was actually made for students that were deaf, which is pretty cool. And so it takes a lot of the heavy language piece out of learning, like the phonemes. And it's a very systematic, structured approach to reading. And then we also are trained or some of our teachers, when students have a higher level of understanding language, they also may be ready for a different approach, which we also use NIHOUSE's language enrichment program as well.
Very good. Thank you. That was a great question. What is a way to help challenge spellers? My daughter is now 10 and she's still struggling to spell. I know this will be a lifetime struggle, but are there any hacks you know of? That's a great question.
That is a really great question, because sometimes when it comes to spelling can be very difficult because there's a lot of processes that go into spelling. Not only is it phonics, but we're also thinking of motor capabilities. We're thinking of working memory. So, always having that systematic approach to learning literacy, learning reading. So having a structured literacy program is key, and lots of writing practice, but also generalizing. And when I think about spelling, up to a certain point too, I start thinking about the accommodations that have to be made, because spelling can be so difficult for language learners or students with language differences.
Yes. Do you find that that dysgraphia often then accompanies or is maybe the underlying diagnosis in that way?
Sometimes it can be dysgraphia. Sometimes I also think dyslexia as well, which can sometimes come hand in hand.
I have one more question, and this one is, I teach children between the ages of 3 and 6. I find that some parents want their child to start reading before they have finished working on phonics. How would you reply to these parents? That's a great question too. These are all great.
It is really great too, because I get this, and I have a child in daycare, and it was, I hear them working on specific sight words. He's 4 years old. I know that, to me, I know a better predictor of him being able to read is a more phonics-based approach. But then another, children learn how to read in different ways. Not all children learn how to read from I don't want to say not all children learn how to read from a phonics-based instruction, but there are different ways that kids learn how to read fluently. Sometimes it's going to be from a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach, where they may learn sight words first and then learn phonics, or phonics into sight words. To me, I personally love working with language first, because I feel like they need that foundation. And the more that we can educate parents about that as well, from a language-based approach, and that's my personal opinion, I feel like that's where we're going to get the most successful readers. That's where we will get our most successful readers, is from more of a language-based approach. And so having to step back, learn those phonics, and then move on to that, or start blending in some sight words later on.
Oh my gosh, Meagan, this was fantastic. And I love the way that you took that step back from reading, as we spoke about many weeks ago, to really highlight these 5 pillars and that that trajectory of development as it relates to literacy. Thank you so much for your talk this evening. It was amazing. And just feel really lucky that I was able to be here and learn with you tonight. And I know that our audience feels the same. A quick commercial before we go. Number 1, according to our COVID task force, our campus is open again for tours, and we would love to have you. So all you need to do is go ahead and call or email and get that scheduled, and we would love to have you back on campus. Another quick announcement is that admissions is still processing applications for the 2021-2022 school year, and depending on the level, there might be just a couple spots in some of the classes, and in others there might be more. So if you are still interested in inquiring and applying for the next school year, please go ahead and you can contact our Director of Admissions, Meredith Krimmel, and we can help get that started for you as well. One last thing to plug here is that next week will be the 3rd installment of our summer series of adult education. And that one will be with me again. And I will be talking about growing language through everyday lessons, activities, practices in your home. So I hope you'll be there to join us. Once again, thank you, Meagan, and everyone, good night.
Of course, thanks everyone, good night.
Bye.
Bye.